Jamaica and the USA have reached an agreement.
Yeah.
The Cuban doctors will be staying in Jamaica.
It's big news.
We're going to be looking closely at the perspectives of both Prime Minister Holness and Secretary Rubio to really unpack this whole situation. So to kick things off, let's go straight to Jamaica's side of the story.
Okay.
When you listen to Prime Minister Holness, what really jumps out is just how vital these Cuban doctors are to Jamaica's healthcare system. I mean, it's not just a small thing, right?
No, not at all.
This is about making sure people have access to basic, essential medical care.
Right.
Holness really stresses that.
And, I think it's crucial to understand that these doctors are filling really significant gaps in Jamaica's healthcare workforce.
Absolutely.
You're talking about a situation where without them, there's a real risk that people wouldn't be able to get the care they need.
Yes, fundamental.
It's fundamental to the well-being of the entire population.
Okay, so that's the need part of the equation, but then there's the question of how these doctors are being treated.
Right.
Holness is very clear on that point.
Yes, he is.
He emphasizes Jamaica's commitment to making sure those doctors are treated fairly, that they are working under Jamaican law, and that they receive the same benefits as any other worker in Jamaica.
Absolutely. And that's a key point, right?
Yeah.
Because when you have these kinds of international arrangements, there's always the potential for exploitation. But Holness is very clear in rejecting any suggestion of exploitation or human trafficking.
He's saying this is not how Jamaica operates.
And that sends a pretty strong signal, don't you think?
Absolutely. It indicates that Jamaica is committed to upholding international standards.
Right.
When it comes to labor practices. And, it's not just about words.
Yeah.
It suggests that they have systems in place, legal frameworks, protections for workers to ensure that those standards are being met.
So to sum up Jamaica's position, they're saying we need these doctors and we're treating them fairly within the bounds of the law.
Exactly.
Okay, so now let's shift gears and look at the U.S. perspective, specifically Secretary Rubio's initial concerns.
Right.
What was the main thing that was causing apprehension on the U.S. side?
Well, here's the interesting thing. Secretary Rubio's concerns weren't actually directed at Jamaica specifically at first.
Oh, interesting.
It was more about the practices of the Cuban Medical Corporation globally.
Okay.
He was drawing a distinction between providing medical assistance, which in itself is a good thing,
and the way the Cuban government manages these medical missions.
I see. So the U.S. wasn't necessarily accusing Jamaica of wrongdoing.
No.
They had broader concerns about how Cuba was running these programs in other parts of the world.
Exactly.
What were some of the specific issues that were being raised about those other situations?
There were allegations, some pretty serious allegations, of what could amount to forced labor in some countries.
Oh, wow.
Things like doctors not being paid fairly.
Oh, no.
Having their passports taken away.
Oh, that's awful.
Which really restricts their freedom.
Wow.
And just a general lack of autonomy in their working conditions.
So these were the kind of red flags that the U.S. was seeing.
Yes. The U.S. considers those kinds of practices to be labor trafficking, which is something they strongly condemn.
Makes sense. It's a principled stance against exploitative labor practices on a global scale.
Absolutely.
But it's really important to note that Secretary Rubio also said that the U.S. wanted to talk directly with Jamaica.
Yes, he did.
To really understand how their specific program was working.
Yeah, he said the U.S. wanted to better understand the situation in Jamaica.
That nuance seems really significant.
It is.
It suggests that they weren't just going to jump to conclusions.
Right.
That they were open to the possibility that things might be different in Jamaica.
Exactly.
That the negative things that they were hearing about other programs might not apply to Jamaica.
He wasn't issuing a blanket condemnation.
Right.
He was saying, let's get the facts, let's understand the specifics of what's happening in Jamaica before we make any judgments.
So the primary concern was with the Cuban government's actions, not necessarily with the countries that were receiving help from them.
Yeah, that's a really important point. The focus was on Cuba, not on Jamaica.
And that seems like a crucial factor that allowed for a resolution to be reached.
Absolutely. This willingness to separate the global issue from the specific case of Jamaica, that was really important.
It laid the groundwork for a more constructive dialogue.
Exactly. It highlights how targeted engagement, really understanding the specific context of a situation, is often much more effective than just making broad generalizations.
Okay, so now we've got these initial positions laid out. So how did Jamaica and the U.S. actually manage to bridge that gap and come to an agreement? It sounds like open communication was a key part of it.
It was absolutely crucial.
I mean, Jamaica was able to share a lot of detailed information about how their program was working, right?
Yes, they provided specific details about the terms of employment for the Cuban doctors,
Uh-huh.
the benefits they receive, the legal framework that governs their work.
So it wasn't just a matter of Jamaica saying, trust us, everything's fine.
No, they backed it up with evidence.
With documentation, perhaps.
Probably. And that evidence demonstrated that Jamaica was in compliance with international labor standards.
Okay, so they showed that they were treating the doctors fairly.
Exactly, and that was really important in reassuring the U.S.
And on the U.S. side, they were able to acknowledge that Jamaica had a real need for these healthcare workers.
Yes.
And that they were making a genuine effort to treat them ethically.
Right. They were able to see that Jamaica wasn't trying to exploit anyone.
So both sides were able to understand where the other was coming from.
Exactly. And that mutual understanding was really the key to finding a solution.
It sounds like this whole process really fostered an environment where both countries could find common ground. Was there any indication that they were both committed to broader ethical practices going forward?
Yes, there were signs that both Jamaica and the U.S. were on the same page when it came to promoting ethical labor practices in all healthcare collaborations.
So it went beyond just the specific situation with the Cuban doctors in Jamaica.
Right. It was about establishing a shared principle. And remember what we talked about earlier, the U.S. making it clear that they weren't blaming Jamaica, that their concerns were primarily with Cuba.
Yeah.
That was hugely important in keeping the dialogue constructive.
It allowed them to focus on finding a solution that worked for everyone.
Exactly.
So what were some of the tangible outcomes, the specifics of this diplomatic resolution?
Well, it seems like they agreed to set up a framework for ongoing monitoring and evaluation of the Cuban medical program in Jamaica.
Ah, so a system of checks and balances to ensure that things continue to operate fairly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that provides continued transparency.
Right.
And helps build confidence on the U.S. side.
Makes sense. And I also recall something about the U.S. potentially providing support for Jamaica to develop its own healthcare workforce in the long term.
Yes, there was talk about the U.S. offering technical assistance or support to help Jamaica strengthen its own healthcare system.
So that's a really positive aspect of this, looking beyond the immediate situation.
Absolutely. By investing in Jamaica's own healthcare capacity,
Uh-huh.
the U.S. can contribute to a more sustainable solution in the long run.
It could potentially reduce Jamaica's reliance on bringing in doctors from other countries.
Exactly. And ultimately, that's a win-win for everyone involved.
It really underlines how the U.S., through this dialogue, became confident that Jamaica's program was not exploitative.
Right, which was their main concern all along.
And it's great that the U.S. might provide aid to help Jamaica build up their medical infrastructure.
Yeah, it shows a commitment to a positive long-term relationship.
So at the heart of this successful diplomatic process, it seems like there were some really important principles at play. Respect for Jamaica's sovereignty, for example.
Absolutely. The U.S. recognized that Jamaica has the right to make its own decisions about its healthcare policies.
And they respected Jamaica's choice to partner with Cuba.
Yes. This wasn't about the U.S. trying to dictate terms to Jamaica.
It was about engaging in a respectful dialogue, taking into account Jamaica's specific needs and circumstances.
Exactly. And underlying that was the importance of mutual understanding.
Both countries had to make an effort to see the issue from the other's perspective.
And that's really the foundation of any successful diplomatic effort.
It wasn't about one side winning and the other side losing.
Right.
It was about finding a way forward that addressed everyone's concerns.
Absolutely. In this case, they managed to find a solution that addressed the U.S. concerns about potential exploitation, while also respecting Jamaica's need for healthcare professionals.
This whole story really highlights how effective diplomacy can be.
It does.
When it's based on open communication, a willingness to understand different points of view, it can really lead to positive outcomes, even in complex international situations.
Absolutely. What this deep dive shows us is that even when there are potential disagreements, when countries are willing to engage in dialogue, to understand the specific context of an issue, and to work together to find common ground, they can often find solutions that benefit everyone.
So for you, our listener, this situation is a great example of how international relations can work.
It is?
Think about other challenges that the world is facing. How many of those challenges could be addressed through a similar approach? An approach that emphasizes really understanding the nuances of a situation, respecting the unique circumstances of each country involved,
Right.
moving beyond those broad generalizations to find solutions that actually work.
I think it's a powerful lesson.
It really gives you a lot to think about in terms of the potential of diplomacy on the global stage.
That does.
Food for thought.
Right.
Perhaps.
Absolutely.
All right, that's it for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.